Well, good evening, everybody. Glad you're able to be with us tonight. Well, we are back in 1 Corinthians. Tonight we're in chapter 13. And last week I said that, this is, some people refer to this as the love chapter. Understandably why, but let's just jump back into the series itself. There was a problem in the church of Corinth. It started out with them dividing themselves. Oh, I'm better than you because of this person baptized me or that alone. Paul got onto them about that and said Christ is the only one that died for you. And all of you that think you're so smart, this wisdom is deceiving you. Your earthly wisdom is deceiving you. And Paul started to deal with the sin that was in the church there in Corinth. Talked about how a little bit of yeast leavens the whole batch, and they were suing each other in criminal courts and stuff. And then he started talking about sexual relationships, both improper and proper. And then he started working in chapters 8 through 11 is where we've been a lot, dealing with the weaker and stronger brother, and how there are times that some things, somebody may think something's wrong that may not be wrong, but they don't have the understanding yet, and how we need to be careful with how we deal with them. We need to be responsible in the manner that we deal with them. And then he goes on to tell them that, just because you're stronger, don't think that you can't fall, because I promise you can. And you need to be considerate of your weaker brother. And he talked about himself, gave an example of himself not taking money for preaching, even though he could. Then it got into head coverings this last time around, and how that was common in Roman society, especially to cover your head when you prayed. And it brought up that, it was new for Christians and for people of that time to be mixing in worship, men and women to be mixing in worship and socially. Today, even in worship in the synagogue, the men and the women are separate. And even in the Roman society, the men and the women were separate. And the men and women were worshiping together. And there was just flat out some questions about, hey, what is right? There was a little bit of confusion there, and that's understandable. But now we've hit a major shift point last week specifically. And we started talking about spiritual gifts. And we talked about how there's miraculous biblical miracles and the difference between them and just things God does today that we don't understand how it was done, and how we refer to that as a miracle because that's the word we have to use. And there was some confusion, still is a lot of confusion around that, and we've been covering that. And today in chapter 13, it discusses more the disposition that should be used in the use of the gifts, and how those gifts are actually a limited time duration of it. And disposition, just a quick definition, is a tendency to act in a specific way. So it talks a little, so really in 13, he's telling how you should be using those gifts, and what for, and how you should be, because it's not just all willy-nilly. So we pick up today in chapter 13, verse 1, and I'm going to divert here just a little bit. The first verse says, "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal." Okay, I'm going to divert real quick and go through and talk about what love. First of all, agape is the word used throughout this whole chapter. In addition to that, what does it really mean? And what it, or let's, first of all, there's 7 or 8 different types of words, different words that are used in the whole Bible, Greek and Hebrew, just in the Greek and Hebrew, not to mention the Aramaic. But it's important for us to understand what we're talking about. After all, it's even confusing in English, is it not? You know, a little education goes a long way. For instance, I say I love Karen, and I also love cheeseburgers. Well, there are 2 different loves there. You know, I tell a friend of mine, hey, love you, man, you have a good day. That's a different type of love than love for food and love I have for my wife. And I tell Paul I love him. That's a completely different type of love. We're all able to understand that because of context. Context is huge in the Bible. And we see here today, fortunately, they actually explain what love is in this chapter. And the love they're talking about is agape. Well, the first Greek word used is eros, which is kind of like what I have for Karen. It's a romantic love and a sexual love. Then the second Greek word that's used is storge, and which refers to a familiar type of love, a family love, like a mother has for a child or a brother and sister have for each other. We actually find that word used quite often with other add-ons to it. For instance, astorgio is unloving. A similar term, astragoas, is no love or without natural affection. Those are found in a couple of different places, but that's still referring to a familiarity type love. Then there's philia. Y'all know that because of the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. That's just a term of friendship, of camaraderie. But finally, most importantly, what we're going to talk about in this chapter is agape, which is used to speak of God's love that He has for the world and that Christians are supposed to emulate. Well, if we're supposed to emulate it, we really kind of need to understand it and understand it better. And that's the word that's most commonly used throughout the New Testament. And, you know, I talked a little bit there about all the different meanings of love we have in the English language. And I guess one way to explain agape would be godly love, would be a best way for us to add context to it in the English language. So it starts out and says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can perform fathoms of all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. That's a pretty strong statement there. He says, if I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, he goes on to say, I still have nothing. I gain nothing. Basically, he's saying here, it doesn't matter what you do. Without love of God, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we're not acting for love. If we're not acting in love for the right reasons, it doesn't matter if we're acting lovingly. Yeah, that's the right word, lovingly. You know, there's a lot of fake people in this world, and there's a lot of fake actions and a lot of fake intentions. But in this case, we're talking about godly love. Now, fortunately, they go on here to explain what it is. Isn't it great when they tell you something, then explain it? I love that. And when the Bible does that itself, that's directly from God. And it goes on, and let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever been to a wedding and they've read this part, that love is patient, love is kind. This is verse 4. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it does not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. And it goes on down through there. And the greatest of these is love. I can't tell you how many weddings I have been to, and they read these verses, and the thing is, they're talking about a love. When they're doing it, they're talking about a love between a man and a woman. But that's not what the Bible's talking about. It's another example of something used out of context. The theme of love and spiritual gifts are Paul's trying to weave them together in this chapter because they should be used together. It appears that, and most of the people believe the reasoning for this section was that, quite frankly, he just talked about spiritual gifts, and we know from the beginning that they had been separating themselves out. Look at me, I'm better than you because of X, Y, or Z. It's believed that there were probably some people gloating in that, oh, well, I can do this and you can't. I can heal somebody, but you can't. The only thing you can do is talk in tongues, or I have a gift of prophecy. You can see how that very easily could lead to divisions. However, what I want to do tonight, what all did I just say about love? Can y'all explain all that to me? How many times have you heard this, but never really stopped and looked at what it said? Or just briefly? Well, I'm going to break down. There's 7 types of love that was just listed that are positives. The first one, love is patient. And that can be when we stop and try to put it in context. What would be a good example of that? Well, what was Paul just talking about? The stronger brother and the weaker brother? Acting in a godly love to that weaker brother would be giving them time to grow and develop and to get that understanding that one may already have. It says love is kind. Well, it might be a better way to put it is love has a sweet disposition. Because kindness is an active participant or an active verb, where patience not so much. So you can have patience with someone and not be kind to them, or maybe not even come off as kind. But being kind oftentimes has a sweet disposition. Like many of you here have a sweet disposition. Oh, don't worry about it. Oh, honey, it's okay. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, along with you need to wear a tie. That was a joke for those that didn't know. But anyway, as we move on, but we do pick on you another once in a while around here. But as we move on, it says, love rejoices in the truth. Okay. What's an example of that? Well, I'm teaching. My example, of course, is instant replay in sports. And y'all think, what? Think about this for a second. There's a play on the field, and a call is made. And it may be right, and it may be wrong. But instant replay will show you what is correct. And the question is, if the call was for your team and it was overturned, Are you annoyed with it and don't like it? Or are you actually still glad that the right call was made no matter how it impacts you? And that's one way you can understand love rejoices with truth. You're more concerned about the truth than any impact it may or may not have on you individually. The next thing it said was love bears all things. Does this mean we're doormats? No, that's not what it's talking about. Bearing all things is really a balance between being willing to give assistance and protection at the same time. When you bear all things, sometimes it's difficult and you have to give. Sometimes you bear all things. You may be in a bad situation. You may be struggling with something, but you continue on and you accept assistance. See, there's multiple ways of assisting there. Sometimes it may be you taking protection or taking assistance or giving it. Love believes all things. That's not that's basically trusting, inclined to trust instead of being suspicious. When somebody tells you something, you're more likely to believe them than to be suspicious of them. Love hopes. I put optimistic here, not pessimistic. We're actually covering this a little bit on Sunday in the lesson I'm preaching. But there's a big difference between optimism and pessimism. Love hopes, wants the best, not only for you, but for everyone. And love endures. That's not tolerance, by the way, but that's endures, that's confidence in the eventual outcome, if you will. May be difficult at the moment, but you have confidence in the outcome. And actually, if we look back at that little section, there were 7 things that are positive, 8 things that are negative. 15 things mentioned there in those 3 verses about love. And the next question is, what part of these do we do? I'm not going to say all the time, or just how are these things, where is our meter level on these 3 things? It starts out, love doesn't envy. Basically not getting aggravated or jealous of somebody else's prosperity. Love doesn't boast. And really, we should probably think about this also in the light of, doesn't view others in a condescending way or manner. I'm glad you were able to do ABC, but I did X, Y, Z. I mean, everybody in here, I bet, knows somebody that is a one-upsman. Or, I know, I could say, there was a guy I used to work with, he's such a nice guy, but it didn't matter what you said. You could say, I don't know, I just won $10,000 in the lottery. And he'd say, yeah, a couple of weeks ago I won $100,000. Or, it'd be like, well, I know somebody that blah, 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 blah. I mean, it doesn't matter. Honestly, sometimes I don't think people realize that, but it does happen. Of course, it goes on to say the third thing that love is not proud. Pride can really mess up relationships and can be detrimental to love and sharing love. This is the one I had to think about a little bit, but love does not dishonor others. Okay. And I did some reading and stuff, and I really like this statement that I found. And it says, love does not delight in being blunt with the truth. And I was like, okay. Had to think about that a little more. And there are instances where people understand some things, speaking specifically biblically, there are times that people understand things that other people don't. And I've had many instances where people have been rather uppity with their understanding. Well, you're an idiot because this is what it really means. Or, I can't believe you would believe such a thing. That happens a lot. I did it this past week. I was on the trip over to Nashville. I was listening to, just hitting the scan button and hit some Christian talk radio. And a person called in and said, I'm curious of what we can do to make sacrifices to our guardian angel, or how should we be honoring our guardian angel? And I was like, what? That shouldn't have been, theoretically, it shouldn't have been my reaction, even though the person was on the radio. It should have been a little less blunt. It should have been, well, why don't we see what the Bible says about that? And why don't we let the Bible guide us? Of course, that's not what happened, but anyway. Love is not self-seeking. That was the fifth one of them. Basically looks out for the welfare of others, not immersed in self-interest. It can be hard sometimes too, can't it? When you're like, do whatever you want to do. That's not what I would do. Do whatever you want to do. I've made those statements, to be honest with you. But, Romans 12:10 tells us that we should be devoted to one another in love. Honor others above ourselves. And that's absolutely the opposite of what the world teaches us, isn't it? That is definitely more of a definition of a sacrificial love. And how often do we as individuals look out for ourselves? Legitimate question. Philippians 2:5 says, in your relationship with others, have the same mindset as Jesus Christ. Man, think about that for a minute, if you will. Think about how Jesus Christ treated other people. It was always for the other person's benefit. That's hard to do. And the sixth thing that love does not, it says love is not provoked. There are people that there are people that everything is a big deal. And if it's not their way, it's the wrong way. A lot of them, most of the time, are more than willing to explain that as well. But the truth of the question is does it really matter? That's probably a question we should be often asking ourselves when dealing with other people, and maybe the way they do something. Like they do something differently than we do, and I'm talking about anything. They wash the windshield of their car differently. Does it really matter? Does it really matter? Love takes no account of evil. We should see here that basically means don't keep records of wrongs. Does not mean evil's ignored, but forgiveness is forgiveness. Does not, well, you did this or you did that. Or do you, I've never had a woman say, do you remember that time that you did X, Y, or Z? Well, that's an example of memes today. That's a common thing, you know. The feminists want to say men are stupid, and men want to, you know, well, you bring up something that happened 5 years ago. I can't even remember. You know, do you forgive the person for doing something wrong or not? Or do you forgive the person? Love forgives the person for hurting their feelings, whether they meant to or not. You know, because we can get our feelings hurt sometimes when the other person didn't mean to or didn't even know. And the question is, did we forgive it? Or did we store it in our filing cabinet for later? You know, I was picking on Edith tonight. I know, nothing new. But I was picking on Edith tonight. She asked me to add somebody to the email list for the church. And she sent me the email the other day, and I said, I forgot. And she found it on her phone where she texted me. And I said, let me have your phone. I'm going to send it to myself again so it's at the top so I'll remember to do it. And I sent it to myself, and then I said, well, you know, I typed in, hey, idiot, do what I told you to do. That's what I told her jokingly. And I said, I'm just saving that for later. Of course, it was a joke, and it was kind of funny. But there are people that might do that hang on to things like that. And the last one is, love does not rejoice in sin. And in essence, love isn't happy when someone falls or fails, however you want to refer to it, even if they have something to gain from it. Even if they have something to gain from it. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to understand today. I had an interesting thread a couple weeks ago when Aaron Rodgers got hurt. He got hurt first game, out for the rest of the year. And there was this thing on one of these Sports Center or something. And I said, well, at least we don't have to hear about him the rest of the year. Oh, man, you're talking about people blowing up. I mean, they were just going nuts. Oh, so you hate him, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you're glad he got hurt, blah, 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 all this stuff. And I finally was like, can anybody tell me where I said that? And they're like, well, if you're glad you don't hear about him the rest of the year, that means you hate him. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. Is it wrong for Zach Wilson's mom to be happy for her son that he's playing the quarterback now? No. Does that mean she wanted Aaron Rodgers to get hurt? No. Does that mean she was happy Aaron Rodgers got hurt? No. There can be different things. I said, if your team that you love plays the Jets this year and your team wins, you need to be sad about it because Aaron Rodgers got hurt. Is that what you're saying? There's a lot of people that believe a lot of things and make wild accusations a lot. Be aware of that. But I will say this, you've won an argument on the internet when you see people go back and start deleting their responses. But not that I take pleasure in that. Let me see how much far we have to go. I'm going to stop there because this next part is really important. When you get a minute, try to read this coming week, verses 8 down. There's a statement here and says, love never fails. But where there are prophecies, look at what he's talking about. He says, where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. Paul is saying all of these gifts are going away. Period. And he says in verse 9, for we know in part and we prophesy now, but when completeness comes, what is in part, just said prophecy, disappears. Think about that a second. What is completeness? What are they talking about? There's two schools of thought. One right, one wrong. No offense. Comes down to context. Some people say, well, the completeness here is when Jesus comes back. Well, that means there's still, everybody has gifts now, right? I'm just curious. Has anybody gone to the hospital lately and seen a doctor? Sure. I know several of y'all have. One that may need to go see a doctor. But if we still have these gifts, okay, one of them is healing. Why isn't there just a guy that drives around in an ambulance to everybody that needs it, and why doesn't he just heal them? If we've got this healing still, I kind of gave away some of my big thing next week, but think about that this week. It can't be talking about Jesus coming back, because Jesus hasn't come back. And if Jesus hadn't come back, that means all of these gifts are still present today. So think about it. How many people you know that heal somebody? How many people you know that on and on and on and on and on. I'll leave it there. Y'all, I hope you have a good evening. Remember, we love you. Questions, comments, send us a message. We do love you, and we hope you have a wonderful evening.